Hi everyone, it's your boy Zach, and this is my review of The Shadow from 1994. I just watched this for the first time, and maybe since 1994, I don't know. It was one of those movies where every time I mean, people don't talk about it a lot, but whenever people would talk about it, I would have blandly positive memories of it. Mainly for some reason, almost the only thing I remembered about the movie is that Alec Baldwin was a really good Bruce Wayne, and that there was something in a giant sphere where he was drowning. That was basically it. And then I was well, I was actually going to review Transporter 2, and I was like, I think no, I don't think Transporter 2 is exactly like it's just a movie that's been on cable like 1 trillion times. Like it's not something you really review 20 years later. But you know, comic book, sci-fi, pulp. Okay, yeah, okay. So the Shadow will fit. So the main thing I remembered about The Shadow was there was this period in the mid 90s where you had well, I mean, like, what was it? 1990, you had Dick Tracy, and then you had The Shadow 94. I think The Phantom was like 1995. So there was this, like, pulp hero resurgence, but every single one did more okay than the last until they just kind of stopped. And whoever had the rights to Doc Savage are like, well, it's just about to happen. They probably had who would have been for a 1997 Doc. Yeah, it probably still would have been Arnold Schwarzenegger. So anyway, I rewatched this, and a funny thing happened. As I was rewatching it, I was realizing that I barely remembered it at all, but was kind of enjoying it. And then, like every 5 minutes that clicked by, it seemed my enjoyment seemed to click up by about 5%. It started off just kind of okay, and it's like, oh wait, what's going on? And I mentioned this a million times that I can barely ever watch movies all the way through. So I watched like the first half over like I don't know, 12 hours, and then I realized I was running out of time on my 24-hour rental. So then I kind of I forgot about it, and then I was like, oh, I got like an hour left. So I watched the whole final hour in one go, and it actually the Amazon Prime subscription ended like right as the credits started, like it froze. So I was like, okay, I just barely made it. So The Shadow is Alec Baldwin as Lamont Cranston. I gotta say, having watched the movie twice in the past 26 years, I feel like there are some very, very confusing things done. First of all, I don't really know The Shadow that well at all. But I know his thing. He has like a very distinct nose, and they decided to give a very distinct putty nose to Alec Baldwin. Now, one of the things that's just jumping out to me is The Shadow has a mask, or more precisely, a scarf. So I don't know why they just didn't have the scarf, pulled over his, most of his face, like the way people use scarves. I don't know. I know very few people who put a scarf just over their mouth. It's usually, you're, because it's cold, so you're gonna put it over everything. You're gonna look like, like the Cobra soldiers. So for some reason, and again, even in 1994, like I guess like if you were into comics, you heard about The Shadow. I don't think even like the average normie would even knew what it was. Like the average normie knew about Dick Tracy because he had a comic strip, but The Shadow had just kind of been like gone from pop culture for like half a century. So it was a little weird one. Even the Phantom, he had a comic strip, and but yeah, the as far as I know, The Shadow didn't have anything. He was in some like Denny O'Neil written Batman comics, right? There was a crossover, and oh, he had a DC comic in the '80s. It was actually pretty good. Kyle Baker doing some of the art. So, but yeah. Oh, and then there was a Howard Chaykin miniseries, but it wasn't any kind of like, yeah. I mean, I would say that the average normie knowledge of the Shadow was slightly below, in 1994 was slightly below the average normie knowledge of Iron Man in 2008. But anyway, so it's an origin story, and it's written by David Cope, or Kep, or however you say it, who wrote like half of these type of movies in the 80s and 90s. So it's very, very by the numbers as far as an origin and a period piece and all of that. That being said, it's still kind of weird and funky and fun and adventurous. So it starts off, he's a opium lord in Tibet, and they call him Ying Ko. But since it was still the 1990s, like it was just on the borderline of would they actually hire a Caucasian actor to play an Asian character? I would say even in 1994, that's possible that would happen. But no, he was just supposed to be like some World War One vet who, kind of lost himself and ended up, drug running, and then he worked his way up. So they introduced. The funny thing is, I barely remember this movie, but as soon as they introduced the phurba, I remember the phurba and the name of it really, really well. This phurba is this weird, like funky, brass knife with a face. It's straight out of Big Trouble in Little China. It feels like a prop and a subplot that was like left out. So it's how do I describe it? It's a floating knife with a face that will bite you, and it can fly by itself, but it can also be controlled if your ESP is strong enough. So we see, Lamont Cranston recruited to be part of the League of Shadows. I don't know. Basically, he gets some training. He goes back to New York City. His family was already rich, or he made a whole bunch of money in the heroin trade. I get the feeling it's a little bit of both. And then he's set up as a kind of sort of hero / urban myth / I got to say, the first scene of the Shadow in action is trash. First of all, it's on one of those sets where like it's basically like a TV set where, part of it's physical and then they just have a painting in the back of like the rest of the road, and it's really obvious. The other thing is they seem to interpret the Shadow's powers as being a ghost, which is weird. And then of course you get some trash 1994 CGI. I kept thinking about, for the first 20 minutes, I kept thinking about The Phantom, which I have rewatched a lot in the last few years, and I think that holds up amazingly well. I almost think it like deserves like a limited run, in theaters, with how popular comic book movies are now. It's just like, just whatever, just put Shadow out there and see how much money it gets. But the Shadow is far, far superior, or the Phantom is far superior to the Shadow. But the Shadow like just starts to click in, like, and start to have some fun once it gets like past the we gotta do the order, whatever. So then it starts to get into a very, very simple and generic plot of an atom bomb that they don't even have an atom bomb. They don't even have the name for it. They call it an implosive, explosive something device. And then Alec Baldwin, who's just, I just love how over the top all of his line readings. He's like, an atom bomb. Like he talks like that. One of the fun things about this is you can tell he probably wanted to be Batman and he didn't get it. And his agent, he's like, we got you for the Shadow. He's like, huh? He's like, it's kind of like Batman. He goes, okay. So like every scene, he's like, I'm kind of like Batman. He was kind of doing like the quirky line readings of Michael Keaton, and he's got some like doozy of lines where like the bad guys wants to take over the whole world, and he starts talking trash about like America, and then Alec Baldwin is like, "Watch it, pal! You're talking about the U.S. of A." or something like that. And then they have Margot Lane, who is some woman who was in like every third movie from 1990 to 1994. Seriously, she's in like freaking everything from that era. I forget her name, but she's playing Margot Lane. And they both have ESP, although Margot's is like natural and I guess I think Lamont Cranston had to develop his, but she's kind of she doesn't understand why, he can read her mind, and he's like, I'm quite well endowed, psychically speaking. Like, come on, dude. And he just has all these funky, cool line readings, and he's really like, this is a movie where the scenery budget and the catering budget are the same pot of money because nobody's eating food. Just everyone's just chewing scenery all day long. It's edible scenery. Like, great, freaking amazing cast that I'm all blanking on. So I'm just gonna say the roles they played. Pennywise, the original Pennywise from the ABC miniseries. Gandalf was in there. The first scene is like every Asian actor from everything in the 80s, like almost to the point where it seems to be like they're doing it just to like to mess with you. And then they got John Lone. I remember back at the time they kept saying John Lone. It's a big deal that we got John Lone to play the bad guy, and I don't remember seeing him in anything before or since. But I remember the press back then. This was poised to be a huge movie, like a huge blockbuster for the summer, and I really couldn't remember whether it was a hit or a flop. I just looked it up. It wasn't a flop, but it didn't break even. It was like made for 40 million and made 48 million worldwide. So I think if you throw in all the other things, it might have broken even. It definitely didn't get a sequel or anything like that. Nor does it really need one. It introduces a fairly simple character. The shadow scenes get better, but honestly, I really didn't care about the shadow scenes because Alec Baldwin as kinda Bruce Wayne, that was good enough. There were some cool escapes. One of the things I liked about him is he wasn't insanely OP. So there's just little things like, he's in a room and he can kind of like disappear, but one of the bad guys shines a spotlight and kind of locates where he is, and then they shoot some arrows and they pin him to the wall. I was like, that was cool. He gets away by just pulling out guns and shooting the bad guys. It's like, not sure why you waited for that one. You got a kind of limited skill set, and then at one point he gets trapped inside a giant sphere, and it's filled with water. Well, his weird shadow powers really don't do anything there. So at one point he just has to do like a classic hero thing, is he's like breathing through a bullet hole in the side of the sphere, and then he psychically calls Margot Lane, and this is all like practical effects. It's a real set being flooded, and there's an exterior where she opens the door and then a stunt woman gets smashed with water. It was cool. There's even a bit at the end where he gets into Shiwan Khan's lair. Oh, this was a really cool bit. It's an invisible skyscraper that's being psychically hidden from. Like I said, this is a real simple story, but when things pay off, they actually pay off kind of well. I really miss the days where superhero movies were not so damn overblown and like 90% CGI and pop culture references and none of that stupid stuff. Like this is just like a straight up adventure serial. And so at one point he goes into and he's like, I got you now, Shiwan Khan, or whatever the hell he says. And then Shiwan Khan presses a button, and then the whole like parquet floor starts kind of like moving like some sort of carnival ride, and then the shadow falls down and he slides because gravity. Yeah. Okay, I was like, cool. There's even a cooler bit. There's a lot of like cool guy jousting between Shiwan Khan and the shadow Lamont Cranston. And one time he's in his lair and he's like backing up against the wall and he like presses a hidden button and then there's a pistol right there. It's like, come on, cool. There's even a cool bit where it's like Lamont Cranston is about to get shot by one of Shiwan Khan's goons, but then Lamont Cranston puts the whammy on the goon and gets the gun. Cool little stuff like that, like lots of cool little bits. And the final shadow scenes are actually pretty cool. There's even a fun scene where there's like a spherical atom bomb that starts rolling down like this hotel hallway and starts going down the stairs, and then it almost falls down the elevator shaft. And like, I don't know. I would say like this is a movie that I don't think anyone really cared about the Shadow, and it was just a bunch of people being like, "So who's the Shadow?" It's like he's kind of like Batman. But for being a movie that had like zero expectations, made by a bunch of people who seem to have no idea who the Shadow is, it is actually kind of fun. That being said, I had to pay $3.99 to rent this on Amazon Prime for only 24 hours. And I got to say, the prices they're giving for 26-year-old movies that no one remembers is getting freaking ridiculous. So I'm about to stop. If it's not like, I'm not going to be paying these $3.99 for some movie that's probably been shown on the USA Network like 500 times in the last 2 decades. So anyway, positive. Is it worth $3.99? Oh, jeez. It depends on how much money you make, I would say. If you make 6 figures, I'd say yeah. If you're down there in the 5 figures, I'd say no. But anyway, yeah, go check it out. I mean, I haven't seen it on any of like the streaming services like included. I don't think ever, because it's something that would have made it. It would have made its way onto my watch list if it would have been on anything. I never. Although Hulu is really weird. Like they don't really advert. You have to like go hunting for what they have. So I don't know. So good fun movie that actually improves as it goes along, which is strange. So anyway, thanks for watching. And I'm not sure what's going to be next. I've got Elektra and Judge Dredd in my Amazon Prime queue. And then I'm also looking at getting into The Expanse. So we'll see. Anyway, thanks for watching. Bye. Oh, and tell me if you want to see stuff like Transporter. I felt it's like, I think people are fine if I skip that one. People want to see more of like the sci-fi superhero type of stuff on this channel. Thanks for watching. Bye.